Yeah.
That's good to hear. I hope you're making it through.
Yeah, it's a weird way.
Some
Weird way to
tough
end it.
days.
Yeah, weird way to end it actually. So.
Oh yeah, that's tough. I'm sorry about that.
It's it's all right. They try to give us a get this. They talking about getting us a refund, and they gave us like $20, like the commuter
Oh
students.
wow, that's
Like,
crazy.
and our fee is. I mean, you went to an expensive school, but our fee was it's private though. Our fee was like for student activities, so that they could do all the arts and like all that those concerts.
Yeah, the
It was
promotions and everything.
$900, and
Oh my
they
gosh, did
refunded us.
they didn't waive that at all?
I mean, they probably already had spent it up until like
Oh right.
maybe early March, but they couldn't have spent all of it, you know.
Yeah, I'd seen some places were trying to get a bunch of the fees waived and hadn't. I think it was maybe NYU. At some of their drama schools were trying to get the fees waived, and they were just kind of like, "You guys are." I think they were paying like $60,000 and had to do everything online and didn't get any like in person instruction. It's like, why would you want to pay that much money for a Zoom class? But I guess it's all good when you get to finish up the degree.
Yeah, I heard. Yeah,
Just be done with it.
I heard something about that, but like I think I want to get too into it, but I believe their logic was even though you had to be in person to like to learn like to maximize your learning experience. They were like,
Right.
well, like this is how we pay our teachers. So I was just like, I don't know.
Right.
But it's NYU.
Yeah, it's tough.
It's like I guess their logic was the method in which they used the tuition was like they couldn't do anything about it, but they probably were lying. Who knows?
Right. Yeah. Who knows?
So this thing, it's like the last like 48 hours that I'm doing this. So I'm just like, I think I already texted to you. It's just the basics of. I kind of made this assignment based off of the concussion movie, and they had a book about it, which the concussion is based off actually a book called League of Denial.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So.
That's interesting. So are you writing about like the different like practices, concussion practices, and methodologies that they have now, or how are you really looking at it? Like for at all levels, or are you looking at NFL in particular?
Well, it's NFL was like there's different sections, so it's just to put some context around it. It's a year-long thing, so it's two semesters, 4 credits each, and
oh wow,
and we divide it, and so we divide it basically into chapters. So I guess it kind of works as like a resume for us. It, like even though who wants to read something that's 19 pages when they're hiring you, but
cool.
I guess we can make it like a PDF. So like I think my chapter 1 is like it's the Springfield running back that I knew from Blue Devils. Like he had hurt his ankle or whatever, and I was just going through the rehab. So there's different chapters, and the NFL chapter is just it's based off of Mike Webster, who is the Steelers center. He actually was just named to the all-time 100 team. Actually, I love that show.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
I think I'd seen that a couple weeks ago when that was out. That's been all over the NFL Network.
Yeah, so it's just I was actually following it while I'm terrible at bow tie, but I was actually following it like as I was ripping tickets because it came on Friday night, even though I had it on the DVR with Rich Eisen.
Oh, nice.
So basically I'm going for a tangent, but basically Webster, he was the first one with the CTE, and since the NFL they need to earn money, like the big business thing, they just try to deny deny him disability and stuff like that, but they gave it to him.
Wow.
But it was a whole scandal of like how they denied like what football could actually do to your brain, and
right.
And I think they reached a settlement in like 2012. So that's why you'll see they have the horse collar rule, which should have always been a rule. And now they have like the head to head, and even like they have the one where if you can't use your head as a battering ram, but I don't think it's ever been called. So like if Lynch had the ball, if Lynch had the
even
ball,
offensive players,
if Lynch had the ball, he couldn't like use his head to go into the chest of a linebacker, which they don't ever. I've never seen it called, but they made it a rule.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen that either. That I can't imagine what would happen if they enforced that on a running back.
Yeah,
that's tough.
Yeah, that like I don't. My conspiracy says they'll do it in like a Patriots game.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, so
that's whenever it's a big game.
Yeah, that's the basis. That's the basis of it. So I kind of just wanted to get into like a history of if you unfortunately you or your brother had any injuries, or if you've seen like your fellow linemen have any injuries. Just a basic. So just talk about that a little bit. And
Yeah,
how? Yeah.
I don't think I haven't really, in my experience, run into anyone who's had any uh, continued issues with concussions or anything like that. I know of people who had them in college, but I would say over what was noticeable over my experience was how much the concussion protocol and the in-game rule changes and changes in practice protocol really influenced the game. Because I'm sure that you starting off playing Blue Devils saw it the same way. People didn't really know anything about concussions or about diagnosing them or about keeping people out of practice. It was kind of something based on feel and kind of personal reporting rather than having anyone looking out for it. Now there's a full, it's very strict even in college on spotters and even in helmet technology. So I think that's been the biggest thing that I would say, and then also the changes in-game rules, especially on kickoffs and the targeting, like you said before, and the crackbacks have really made a difference on the game. But I think, and something you were talking about before, especially with somebody like Mike Webster who's playing on the line, I'm not sure if those influence so much about people who have long-term damage. And I know that from some of the studies that have come out and in movies like Concussion, they talked about more of the subconcussive blows that cause CTE. So I know that their NFL especially and the NCAA are doing their best to limit big-time collisions all the time. But I think, unfortunately, you won't know the impact of that for a while.
All right. So just another question is what would you say has been over your career that you've witnessed the most common injury? Because I'm getting a lot of like shoulders and a lot of like knee problems specifically.
The most common injury, I think, probably shoulder ligament issues with knees and some labrum issues with shoulders, and then also, of course, just muscle injuries like a pulled hamstring. But I think, and then some sprained ankles here and there. But I think those are more of the it's more muscular and ligament issues. Honestly, concussions were pretty. I don't think we're very high on the list in college, but I think especially over the end, and I know concussion numbers have gone up in the NFL. I think just with so much of a focus on it, I think it's really helped to be able to diagnose and establish a protocol to make sure that players aren't just coming back or not even being diagnosed with them.
And I talked to a coach at Stepanek, and he was giving me kind of the same. He was kind of giving me the kind of the same like answers, I guess. But he was also saying like the importance of stretching and stuff like that, because they had a lot of like torn stuff early, and then like over the last decade they've kind of gone like a half an hour full, and they're just a high school team. So just talk about at the college level, like what your stretching was kind of like.
At the college level, a huge difference between college and lower levels of football, high school, and whether it be Pee Wee or whatever lower level, is the injury prevention. I think you have a full strength and conditioning staff, so a lot of what they're responsible for is getting people warmed up and stretched, and a lot of the lifting and running that you do is focused on making sure that people don't get injured and preserving the athletes, because they really want to have people ready for game day. So I think that in combination with some of the concussion rules that have gone in place the last couple of years really places more of an emphasis on rest and recovery than really wearing people's bodies down.
So it's funny, like you mentioned the strength and conditioning, because another trend that I was getting was the guys who had like kind of gotten stiff and they had done a lot of power cleans and they built up their muscles so much like that like they weren't really able to move their hips as well, and they ended up like hurting themselves. So just talk about like the balance between stretching and the balance between trying to get a lift in during the week.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the stiffer people are. It seems to me the more likely they are to get injured, and I think that's why there really is such an emphasis that I saw in college on flexibility and movement and plyometrics. There's still a lot of heavy lifting, but a lot of the exercises are mixed in. So rather than just going in and powerlifting or bodybuilding like you would think about Arnold Schwarzenegger or somebody like that, it's a lot of explosive movements and more athletic movements. And I think that's you've kind of seen that with how the game has changed and the different body types that you see, especially in the secondary in football and more of the perimeter players.
So just a side question. Have you played, like, I don't know, past high school, since you probably definitely wanted to focus on football? Did you play other sports past like a certain age? Like
I played did not play anything else in college, but I played baseball, high school basketball for 2 years, and then I played varsity baseball for all of my high school. So football and baseball through high school, and then just continued on with football in college.
All right, so those are. I've come to appreciate, like, with baseball, at least from the pitching standpoint, because people are gonna be sore after you throw a baseball 100 times in a game, or in high school they have a lot shorter. High school, like, they have shorter innings, so I guess, but still, I say that to say, what's the difference between the recovery time from like a baseball game to like a more physical sport like football?
I think it depends on what position you play in both sports. I think if you're a pitcher, there's going to be a longer, normally it's 5 days rest if you're throwing close to 100 pitches or so. And then, but as far as game to game as a positional player playing shortstop or second base or something, you could play a game every day of the week in baseball. You might have some soreness there. But it's a whole different world than the level of exertion that you have to make in football, and also the contact makes a huge difference. You really couldn't play. You really need, especially in college and in high school too, because most people play both ways. You really need the full week to recover. I don't know how. Just the last couple of days, I've seen some things about the NFL changing the Thursday night rule. And they haven't decided yet, but that must be a crazy recovery to come from play on Sunday and then play again on Thursday. Must be really tough. And I know that's kind of up in the air on the players' end of collective bargaining.
That's a good point, because I mean, admittedly, I used to actually like pick each game for the so what's it, like 17? Well, they have bye weeks, but let's just say there were 16 games in a week. And
right.
I would pick each game, which means I had to submit everything on Thursday, which I didn't get. I feel like you should just pick. It was a CBS Sports thing, and I always underestimated. Like, I didn't do the critical thinking of, they just played like a Sunday afternoon game, and they have to go in to practice Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. It just, to me, it's a little bit.
Yeah.
The fans love it, but yeah.
Yeah, I think it's always fun to have another game to watch, but I think that's something that the players have kind of complained about, and I know you were talking before about concussions and the different rule changes, and whether or not it's the league is really sincere about those. I've seen some players complain that if they were really sincere, they wouldn't have us play for 3 or 4 days afterwards. So I can't imagine the recovery that they have to go through. Because I know even in college, you have some pretty light practices whenever you're playing a short notice game.
All right, so I'm going back to the stretching thing, because that's actually like a big chapter for me. So, like, I guess you kind of talked about like the resources between, like, you have a strength and conditioning coach, and you probably don't have the luxury of that in high school. It's probably just 3 or 4 coaches. So I'm blanking on the question as I'm saying it, but I just wanted to know how seriously, like, your fellow teammates kind of like took the stretching thing, because in high school it's just like a bunch of people talking about class, and
it's completely different than high school. I'm sure you played at Tuckahoe, right?
Right.
And Bronxville was the same way. We had athletic trainers, and we had coaches that we had a stretching kind of routine, but it's completely different. You have I'll try and think of, we had upwards of 5 to 10 trainers just dedicate taping ankles and stretching people out before practice, and so you would have to be in to practice a couple hours early just to stretch out before meetings, and then after meetings you'd go out early to stretch out, and then the warm-up was probably 30 minutes, and then we'd stretch after practice as well. So it's a huge emphasis, and the strength and conditioning coaches really take that very seriously. And we probably had, I think when I was at Duke, we probably had 10 or so people on the strength staff who would be stretching people out and going through it. But different from high school or from growing up where you just kind of have stretch lines, we would go through a full, really exhaustive warm up, and then do static stretching. So there would be a dynamic warm up and then a static stretch after that, and then you'd get into practice. And we would do that same warm up routine before every single thing we did, whether it be lifting or running or agility work. And that's I think one of the biggest differences between high school and college is just how much you have to focus on stretching and making and rest and recovery. You have a full staff dedicated to it, and a full in the strength and conditioning coaches, and then a full staff dedicated to it with the athletic trainers. So if you have like a bump or bruise or a muscle strain, you'll have extra time to go into the training room to get massaged or iced or have stim, which is electric stimulus on your whatever injury you have. And then they had a team of doctors too, so that's a huge emphasis. And it's interesting that that's what you're looking into.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a lot. Like I played half a season at Alfred, and I even hated just being in. I mean, it was a big difference, but I even just hated even being in the meetings. And I didn't realize like you get taped up, and then you go into a meeting, then you come back out. You probably this is not relevant, but you probably like don't get out of practice until like 6:30 from, let's just say you have a short afternoon class. But like I kind of asked that from the perspective of like in Springfield, this like. The player I was talking to, he just said like that 10-minute window. I mean, they're D3, so they're probably not. They don't have like the same resources. Like, but like these guys aren't taking it seriously, and then they're stiff, and then they do these power workouts, these like power cleans.
Really?
And
yeah. That's interesting because I know Springfield has Alfred and Springfield are both really strong programs, and Springfield also has such a background, such a good reputation for strength and conditioning. I think they call it like Coach U, don't they? Because they put so many, they have so many college and NFL coaches come out of Springfield. But it was definitely taken really seriously at both of the schools that I went to. It's like it was part of practice. And then if you had any sort of injury, you had to be like, they would make sure that you were in the training room way before meetings and practice and coming in on your own time. So it was definitely something that was taken seriously because all of the coaches wanted to make sure people were available for practice and for the games.
Yeah.
So I think that was taken more seriously than a lot of other things. There definitely wasn't any talking during stretching or anything like that. It was part of practice.
Yeah, I mean, I actually have heard of maybe Tony Sperano. He might have came out of New Haven, which is near Massachusetts.
Oh right, yeah, he did. I'm trying to think of some of the. I know there are a lot of college coaches. I think maybe Steve Spagnuolo is from Springfield. He's the defensive coordinator and former defensive coordinator for the Giants.
Yeah, I think he's on the Chiefs. I think he's the Chiefs guy now.
Okay, right.
So another ring for him, but yeah, like I don't think that's it's on the coaches to some extent, but like from what I heard was like they're lifting, and then like their hips aren't flexible basically. So
really?
so they were just getting, so maybe they just did too much lifting, and then it was just like, hey, like like let's go through the stretching, and the guys were just like, now I only had this the sample size from like the 1 year,
Right.
2018 to like 2019, where it wasn't just a football team. It was a lot of athletics where you were getting like hamstring and you were getting guys in boots just walking around. It's probably
Right.
with women's sports as well. So
Yeah,
that was
that's
just like one
interesting
part of
because
it.
I'm sure it's depends on what program you're in and how seriously they take it. But the two places I was in really took stretching and recovery seriously. But I'm sure that it must be tough if you go somewhere that doesn't, and getting all those overuse injuries.
Oh yeah, I forgot. Pablo told me that you had gone to another school afterward, right? After.
Yeah, so I went to played for I redshirted 1 year at Duke and then played 2 years there and then transferred to Columbia up here in New York and played my last 2 years there. So it was kind of interesting to see how different programs ran things, but as far as the strength and conditioning, at both places they really took all the recovery seriously.
So, all right, so I'm going to branch off the recovery. It's probably a follow up question. How did you normally? What was your recovery time just from like a Saturday game all the way to the next Saturday? Or was it like, did you take any ice baths, or what was your method, or
Yeah,
were you?
I think it really depends on the person, but I would take ice baths after every practice, and I would try and be in the training room as much as possible to stretch out and be in the cold tub. That's what they call it, and so I would do that. That I think really helps. But I was lucky to not really have too many injuries. I think just from trying to stay healthy for a long time. But my routine, as far as that would go, before practice, I'd definitely get a stretch and foam roll, which a lot of people do, and then get taped and everything, and then head to meetings, and then you're out there warming up. And I try and stretch out as much as possible during and before practice, and then after every practice, I do some more stretching and get in the cold tub. But as far as like a timeline, you really have one thing that helps is you at both places you'll lift the next day and do a run or end a practice on Sunday. And I think most college programs do that, and that kind of gets the lactic acid out of your legs. And then normally that Monday for most colleges will be your off day. So you have 1 day of not really doing anything, and normally I would go up into the facility to just stretch out and cold tub, and then Tuesday is most teams' most serious practice. So that's where you may be in full pads for the 1 day of the week, and then the rest of the practice is Wednesday you may be in uppers, they call it, which is just the shoulder pads and helmets, and then Thursdays and Fridays are normally depending on what the coach wants to do, you'll normally have these things called spiders, which are just like almost like the inside layer of your shoulder pads. So you're not hitting it all on those days, or you do a walkthrough, which is with no pads. And then you'll kind of feel recovered. So as the week goes on, normally you're a little sore on that Tuesday practice coming out, but as the week goes on, by Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, you should be fully, your legs should be under you. It really depends on the injury, if someone has an injury, but I was lucky enough to never have to sit out a game because of injury.
I'm getting a lot of I did mostly high school interviews, but I'm getting a lot of like the similar, like a lot of the coaches, they're kind of like doing it the same, where like the schedule that you just described, it's kind of like, it's just maybe a day off with how other people are telling me. So it's a huge trend and such. I actually heard from a coach that he's coaching in Florida now, but he was at Mansfield in Pennsylvania. I don't know what
position
that is.
Yeah, I know that's cool.
Yeah, and he was telling me that like as far as conditioning goes, you keep going back to conditioning, it's a trend. He was saying like the NCAA just put in a rule where like you couldn't, you know how like you mess up, you miss an assignment, they're like, on the line, run 50 yards and back or whatever. Right. They actually made that a rule where you couldn't punish. Like I think it's 2019 actually made that rule. You couldn't make it a punishment. It had to be a part of the actual.
Wow.
A part of the
actual practice.
I think
that's crazy.
That's because like there's also like every year someone in Texas or even the Maryland tackle who died, Like it's like 95 degrees outside, and they're running wind sprints. Someone has a heat stroke and dies. So like,
yeah, I think that's the amazing thing that I'm sure you playing Blue Devils and coming up through Tuckahoe changed so much from the beginning of when I started playing football when I was 12 to the later part. Was they used to just kill us running and kill us with the hitting and do all that kind of stuff. Like we would run in 2 a day. We would have 3 a days and just be running all the time and doing the conditioning runs. And towards the end, we really did. You do the summer sprint training, but there would in college there's not much there's not really a conditioning program at the end of practice where you just go. They put you on the line and you run sprints or ladders or anything like that. It's more of a you get your conditioning in through the practice. So that was definitely a huge change with how they do things. So I'm sure you probably had that in your Eastchester Blue Devils. I'm sure they at the end of practice they had everyone get on the line and run across the field or run 100-yard sprints a bunch of times, right?
I mean, right? Yeah. I mean, like I'll talk about it like this. I talked to a parent yesterday about and he had played, I don't know, he had played Blue Devils, but I don't remember where he went to high school. It's not relevant. And his son played at Neuro 6 years ago, and and stuff had changed with him from when he was at the Mount Vernon Razorbacks, which is, I guess that's their Pop Warner team. And he had no idea that these, because he's like, old school, so he had no idea that these rules changes were like so drastic. Like he didn't know that like you couldn't hit in practice anymore. Like, so he was just,
that's crazy.
He was perplexed. He was saying to me, well, how are you supposed to learn how to block and tackle? And then I told him, I said, the theory behind it is, number 1, safety, number 2, subconcussive hits, and number 3, it's like once you're in high school or you're in college, they expect you to know how to tackle anyway. So they do it like, let's say Akron has a spring practice, and it's a bunch of, and let's say the freshmen haven't gotten there yet, but like and like they have a spring practice and the linemen are trying to, they're doing their one-on-ones. So I guess the theory is you take those 3 or 4 days of full contact, and in that you learn, hey, he can block, he can tackle, he should be 3rd on the depth chart. So they adjust their depth charts in the limited time that they have, and then they just go over like hand fighting or hand placement.
There's definitely a lot less contact whatsoever, and you still see it in practices, but there's definitely a lot. It's more of a non-contact in college nowadays, just with the rule changes. I think it was even my senior year, they made a rule that you can only, and it sounds as if from what you just said that it's advanced even further, but they made a rule that I guess you could only tackle on certain days of the week, which that didn't really make that much of a difference because people didn't tackle anyway, just to try and make sure people don't get other injuries rather than head injuries. But they definitely made a huge change on how much contact you could be absorbing during the week.
I mean, yeah. I think it's a huge change, but it kind of came gradually, because like I actually, as I went off on, like, as my previous statement was, I wanted to actually get back to my Pop Warner days, because I do remember, like, I wasn't even the oldest kid on the team, and my coach, I think he's a coach at Stepinac now, maybe the JV. He had said, like, we're gonna keep running until Daryl wins the sprint. I was always like the second fastest or the fastest.
Right.
And there was and now it's just like that's like forbidden at the NCAA level. But
exactly.
But like that mentality, it's baked into football for so long.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
it's pretty hard, it's pretty crazy that stuff doesn't get done, because that is such a huge part of Pop Warner. And then with the bull in the ring drills and Oklahoma drills and stuff like that, you don't really see those quite so much. But it's such a huge part of youth football. So I think they probably are trying to find different ways to teach things. And I think when maybe the last couple of years they had I'm not sure if it's a rule or not, but I know both schools that I went to did it with like showing videos on like different ways of tackling, rather than when you're growing up you kind of hear just put your head, tackle the guy with your face mask, but now they've kind of made some new teaching techniques about how to tackle more with your shoulder, and they call it a hawk roll tackle. More of a roll tackle than a straight on put your head across collision.
Yeah, the hawk roll thing, and the bull in the ring, and the Oklahoma drill. That's actually a section. That's actually a section that I have,
Oh,
from
nice.
a different thing. And I was it feels kind of weird because in my assignment I keep having to refer to like YouTube things. It's kind of weird citing a YouTube video
Yeah,
in like what's supposed to
to
be a
cite it
yeah
in a scientific paper. That's
yeah,
funny.
yeah, it's yeah, it's just it's I feel so it feels so weird. It's just really weird. But yeah,
That's
and like
hilarious.
one of the things I made about the Oklahoma drill and the bull in the ring is when I saw it, I think it was like the Naval Academy and UNC was and those are like obviously it's a gladiator sport, but like those guys like their heads are before they even bang on each other, their heads are so close. I'm like, wouldn't the ball be in between their hand placement? Like they're both offside.
Right.
Like
Yeah. Yeah.
it's so weird to me. I'm like,
We we had done some drills that were like that where you're like only an inch away now. So rather than like have the big collisions, it's more of a I can't remember. Maybe they call it a board drill where you're just right up next to the guy, and it's more like leg drive than collision. But some of those schools that have the tight splits, like Navy or UNC, they're like right up on the ball.
yeah, like you know what's funny? Like, 'cause even though it was only half the season, now as you like told me, I'm like, I actually did tackle like relearn how to tackle in college. Like I didn't even realize
Right.
that. But it was
Yeah.
just like, hey, lift the guy up, and you're within 4 inches of each other, and it's like wrap, and then like drive your whatever like the technique was, drive your
Right.
feet and such. But it's not like it's never full speed, or it's like, hey, stand 5 yards apart, come on the angle, don't bring him to the
Yeah.
ground,
You really
and
don't see too much of that, any bringing to the ground. And I think people are really cautious about injuries now, lower body injuries too. 'Cause you always have, anytime you scrimmage, you always have extra injuries just from people getting rolled up on and twisting ankles and stuff.
yeah, it's kind of like it's kind of like as a player, you sometimes you like I think it's a skill guys. The skill guys kind of want to scrimmage because it's just like I mean if it's like if it's scrimmage as far as like full contact, maybe the skill guys kind of want to do it, and then it's like you just realize like, hey, you're kind of like risking yourself. And
Yeah,
so like
definitely.
the tackling to the ground is kind of like obsolete. It's kind of outdated at this point. So just this is a general question, like you and your brother specifically. Just talk about like if you were like your love for football, if you were raised on it, or how that works.
Yeah, I definitely grew up loving football. I actually started playing in it in Pennsylvania, where I lived for a while, and it's huge in that area. So we kind of were all in on football from whenever we started when we were in sixth grade or so. And we just had a great experience all across the board in football, coming up through middle school and high school, getting to play in Pennsylvania and then moving to New York. So we played on a couple different teams, but really loved the game and loved all that it's done for us.
So
Um,
oh yeah, you can keep going. You can keep going.
yeah, no, whatever's up.
So did you see it like as far as your like is it like, hey, like maybe like your dad influenced you, your uncle, or was it like a rite of passage, or was it just like something in your family?
It wasn't my older brother played, but my dad was a basketball player. Um, so it was kind of the biggest sport in our town, and you kind of look up to the football players and always want to get on the field on Friday nights. Big deal. Friday night lights in Texas is a big thing, but it was kind of that way in Pennsylvania too. So we grew up watching our brother play, and really wanted to start playing once we could in sixth grade.
So has anyone in your like I mean like you played like so your last year was 2010. So the concussion crisis really had it. It was there, but it wasn't like it wasn't nearly as big as it was like 2014 maybe.
Right.
I think that was after junior stay out. Did anyone like your friends, family ever have like ever issue any like concern like just for like the dangers of the game?
Well, that came out. The whole concussion thing was getting taken more seriously when I was in college. But they were just starting to get. I want to say maybe 2008. to 2010, they were getting new helmet technology and everything. So we were actually lucky. I think didn't you guys have Revolution helmets at Rydell Revolution helmets at Tuckahoe? Like the new ones?
Did we have? We didn't have. I don't think we had speed because I would have noticed them. So it must have been right.
We actually got had the speeds donated to our school. So I think at that point people kind of were realizing that there were improvements in helmet technology, and those were the best at the time. So we were lucky to have those, and I think that was kind of it's been pretty amazing, and I'm sure you're around the same era, so have this same kind of perspective in that starting off in football, concussions weren't taken as seriously, close at all as seriously as they are now. So I think the improvements have helped, and it's definitely been important to make people safer and have them aware of the consequences of repeated concussions or concussions in general. But I think you kind of know growing up, I'm sure you experienced it too. Your parents don't want you to be injured, and I think everybody's always worried about that. But I think I was lucky enough to for the most part, stay uninjured.
So what would you say to anyone that like they might be an older relative and their son's maybe like 9 or 10, or even just like, well, that is adolescence age, but anyone at the adolescent age and they're concerned, but their son really wants to play football? What would be your advice to them?
I think the most important thing is to, especially early on, is to learn how to play the game the right way. And as far as going back to your previous question, as far as like family concern, that was the one thing that especially my parents, my mom really was important to her, was that we learned how to play the right way and have a coach that factored safety into things and made sure that people were being safe out there. So I would say to an older relative, if they have children, that it's okay to play football just so long as whoever's in charge is looking out for the safety and health of their child. Because I think there really is a right way to play football. And unfortunately, there is a risk of concussions. But if whoever is in charge and whoever is the responsible adult there is taking their responsibility seriously, they should be able to keep their players safe. I think that's the most important thing, is making sure you don't have somebody that's not neglecting the safety of young children when they're trying to learn how to play a game.
I think that's everything. So,
nice, man.
This thing is due, like, I'm really late with this, Friday at noon. So I'm just gonna.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I'm pulling like one of those like offensive coordinators. I'm pulling one of those all-nighters for like.
Nice.
For like maybe
some game planning.
Yeah, so for like maybe like 14 straight hours, I guess.
That's crazy. Well, good luck, and I hope I was able to help you out, and that everything works out.
Yeah, appreciate it. And once I always tell my subjects, once I finish, I'll have this published somewhere. So maybe I could like, I think I've used a Facebook friend, but I'll tag you somewhere else once I.
Nice, man.
I'll just text you back, and then once I get it like published and it's like re-edited and everything, it'd be long, but like you can probably hit the Google find thing.
Great. No, I'm sure I'll check the whole thing out. Are you looking to go into journalism and writing?
So yeah, it's funny because I kind of wanted like Kevin Devaney's job, but now News 12 Varsity is obsolete. Like it's not really.
Oh, right.
So I went in for comm. Is this my fourth school that I'm at Purchase? Maybe my third or fourth. I lost track, but. So I went in for communications, didn't really want to do the work behind the scenes, kind of got lazy. So I said, I'll just do the writing. And I kind of, it sucks because I kind of thought it would be, I kind of picked it partially because I could link it to sports, but I was like,
right.
This is kind of like, not easy, but it's the easiest major. It's like English class with very, very structured, not that it's easy, but it's like structured English class and principles and, in structure, a lot of structure. A lot of these classes are structured and such. So yeah, I'm trying to work for the Journal News, which is like the online version of it is low HUD, but so hopefully.
Oh right, is Josh Thompson still there?
Yes.
Okay, nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be an awesome gig to have. That'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I'm sure you'll do well with it. But that's awesome.
Yeah, so hopefully, I think the Stepanek coach said he can connect me with it. So a lot of the stuff is connections, as you probably will know.
Oh, nice.
So
yeah, I'm sure, especially in that industry, that stuff is probably so important. But it sounds like you're well on your way, which is awesome. And I'm sure that'll be such a fun thing to do, and especially since you seem so passionate about it and really know your stuff, that should be awesome.
I mean, yeah, I appreciate it. I'm trying to learn the game a lot better because even though like the local, even if you're doing like local football and such, like I'm trying to get to the level of like, which is far off, of one day like the Greg Cosell, the Andy Benoits, who kind of work on the NFL level, where they're doing NFL live shows and they're working at Sports Illustrated. So I kind of try to learn from them and then see like, hey, can I take this little piece here, just take everything in chunks and kind of learn like coverages different. So I always record NFL matchup. So now I'm kind of switching to the offensive line, which is a big part of this study as well, because
oh, nice,
Mike Webster and stuff, because I never played line, so
yeah, it's tough to learn all the different positions. That's a great mindset to have, though, because I don't know if you see it, but it seems like some of the people on the networks don't seem to know about football as much as you'd expect, and some of the former players and coaches really do, but they don't seem to study it, which is great that you're looking to do that. It's always awesome to see when someone really knows, like the difference between watching Tony Romo and maybe some other people, when he has seen those coverages before and is talking with experience. So I think that's the right mindset to have.
Yeah, I'm always just trying to take like I said, little chunks, and hopefully if I go into these like local newspapers trying to get a job and such, and I'm able to like sound a lot smarter than someone who just knows the general rules of football, and I'm in an interview and I'm throwing out like, hey, this is how cover 3 works, this is how cover 2 works, this is how zero blitz works, so stuff like that. It makes you sound smarter, and hopefully I can use it to my advantage.
Right.
But yeah.
Have you? That's awesome. Have you seen? I'm trying to think of. There's not really anyone who does it for the NFL, but it sounds like you'd like to read. Have you ever heard of Zach Lowe? He writes for ESPN. He used to write for Bill Simmons's website, The Ringer. Now he writes mostly NBA, but it's kind of like a breakdown of games and players by like stuff that you'd have to learn, like coverages and defenses and different offensive sets. So I always like reading that, but I wish someone did that for football. There's not really anyone that does that. So I definitely read that if you put that together.
Well, yeah, definitely. Like that's why I like doing interviews, because I always end up learning something like different. Like I would have never known that the NCAA didn't do that punishment thing, like where you couldn't do the thing with the conditioning and such.
Yeah,
so
that's
like I said, like I keep repeating, you always take little chunks and then you apply them. But like I need to do a lot more reading from the sports thing, because I'm studying a lot of film. But like I am gonna have to learn. I know basketball, somewhat decently, not the strategy of it, but like the basic stuff. Baseball, I'm kind of learning more of like the pitches and stuff like that. So just the 3 main sports, that's kind of like my main focus. So yeah,
that's awesome. There's some, baseball has more analysis than some of the other sports, which is cool, just because they have more of the like statistical side of journalism in baseball. So there are a bunch of sites that do the sabermetric breakdowns and the like really detailed things about pitches and like likelihoods of expected likelihoods, which is awesome. But there's really none of that in football. There's the one site, Pro Football Focus, that kind of does grades, which is more of an in-depth thing. I think Chris Collinsworth runs that site. He's the CBS announcer.
Yeah,
or maybe NBC announcer.
He's NBC, yeah.
Yeah, but there's really not anything other than that. But it'd be great to.
I think there's Football Outsiders. I think there's Football Outsiders, which I have to buy.
Football Outsiders, okay.
Yeah.
I've heard about that.
So I have to look into. But I really kind of after this I don't have any excuses because like there's nothing to do other than stay in the house. So unfortunately,
Right. Yeah, and write some stuff up. So I'm sure it'll be a great time for you to do a lot of writing and research.
yeah.
Which should be good. But I hope I helped you out, and if I can do anything else, please let me know.
All right. Yeah, I learned a lot.
Great, man. Good luck on everything, and good luck with graduating and everything.
All right. Thanks.
I'm sure you're excited.
Have a good one.
Thanks. You too.
All right. Appreciate it.